Some superheroes are short in stature, but giant in heart. When Kevin Hart walked onto the Tonight Show stage with his trademark energy and infectious smile, nobody expected him to reveal the most vulnerable chapter of his life story. Jimmy Fallon had planned a standard promotional interview for Kevin's latest film. The audience was ready for the laughs that always came with a Kevin Hart appearance, but what Kevin was about to confess would silence Studio 6B and prove that sometimes the deepest pain creates the most powerful purpose. The cameras were rolling, the audience was already chuckling at Kevin's animated entrance, and then he spoke 13 words that changed everything. Being short taught me that different doesn't mean less than. What came next wasn't just television. It was a masterclass in turning childhood trauma into healing mission that would leave Jimmy speechless and redefine what it means to transform your greatest insecurity into someone else's salvation. Kevin Hart had been dealing with jokes about his height for as long as he could remember. At 5'4", he was shorter than most of his male peers from elementary school through adulthood, and in a society that often equated physical stature with strength and masculinity, Kevin had learned early that he had two choices: let the teasing destroy his confidence or find a way to turn his difference into his advantage. He had chosen comedy, using self-deprecating humor to beat bullies to the punchline, and eventually building a career on the very characteristic that had once made him a target. But behind the jokes and the successful career was a 12-year-old boy who had spent countless nights crying himself to sleep, wondering why he couldn't just be normal, why other kids seemed to find so much joy in pointing out everything that made him different. The scars from those childhood experiences had never fully healed, even after Kevin became one of the most successful comedians in the world. Kevin's journey with bullying had begun in 6th grade at Robert Morris Elementary School in North Philadelphia. He was already smaller than his classmates, but 6th grade was when the height difference became impossible to ignore and apparently impossible for other kids to overlook. What started as occasional comments about his size escalated into daily harassment that followed him from the school bus to the cafeteria to the playground. "Hey, Kevin, did you forget to grow?" became a daily greeting. "Kevin's so short he has to look up to see down" was another favorite. The jokes weren't just about his height, they expanded to everything that made him different: his clothes, his voice, his dreams of being a comedian someday. The bullying was relentless and creative, with kids competing to come up with the most clever insults about Kevin's appearance and personality. The emotional impact had been devastating. Kevin began skipping lunch to avoid the cafeteria, where he was most vulnerable to group harassment. He started walking different routes to classes to avoid the hallways where his tormentors congregated. He even considered asking his mother to homeschool him, though he knew she couldn't afford to stay home from work. "I remember looking in the mirror every morning and wishing I could just grow," Kevin later recalled. "I would stretch as tall as I could, trying to will myself to be taller. I researched growth supplements, exercises, anything that might help me reach average height. I was convinced that if I could just be normal-sized, all my problems would disappear." The bullying reached its peak during a school assembly when Kevin had volunteered to read announcements over the intercom. As he stood on a step stool to reach the microphone, several students in the audience began making jokes about needing a ladder, calling him Mini Kevin, and suggesting he should join the elementary school classes since he was their size. The humiliation was so intense that Kevin ran off the stage and hid in a bathroom stall until the assembly was over. That night, Kevin had made a decision that would define his entire approach to dealing with adversity. Instead of continuing to hide from the jokes, he would learn to make better jokes than his bullies. If people were going to laugh at him anyway, he would control the narrative and make them laugh with him instead. Kevin began studying comedy obsessively. He watched every comedian he could find on television, analyzing their timing, their delivery, their ability to turn personal pain into universal humor. He practiced in front of his bedroom mirror for hours, developing routines about being short, about being different, about the ridiculous situations that came with being smaller than everyone around him. I realized that humor could be a superpower, Kevin explained years later. If I could make people laugh about my height before they could make fun of it, I took away their ammunition. But more than that, I discovered that when you can laugh at yourself, you show people that you're not ashamed of who you are. The transformation wasn't immediate, but gradually, Kevin's self-deprecating humor began to change the dynamic with his classmates. Instead of being the victim of jokes, he became the source of them. Kids started gathering around him to hear his latest routine about being short. Teachers began inviting him to share his humor during class when appropriate. By 8th grade, Kevin had gone from being the target of bullying to being one of the most popular kids in school. But even as Kevin's comedy career took off and he achieved massive success, he never forgot the pain of those early years. The memory of feeling powerless, different, and alone had stayed with him, creating a deep empathy for anyone who experienced similar struggles. As his fame grew, Kevin began to understand that his platform could be used for more than entertainment. It could be used for healing. The mission to help Bullied kids had begun informally about 7 years earlier when Kevin was visiting his old elementary school for a community event. During a break in the official program, a teacher had approached him about a 5th grade student named Marcus, who was experiencing severe bullying because of his size. He was significantly shorter than his classmates and was facing the same kind of harassment Kevin remembered all too well. "Would you mind talking to him?" the teacher had asked. "He's a big fan of yours, and maybe hearing from someone who understands what he's going through would help." Kevin had found Marcus hiding in the library during lunch, reading by himself while his classmates played outside. The conversation that followed had been like looking into a mirror of his own childhood. A bright, funny kid who was being made to feel ashamed of something he couldn't control, who was beginning to believe that being different meant being less valuable. "I told Marcus about my own experience with bullying," Kevin remembered, "but more importantly, I told him that being different wasn't a weakness. It was his secret weapon. I explained that the things that make you stand out are often the things that make you special, and that learning to embrace what makes you unique could become his greatest strength." That conversation had lasted 2 hours and had changed both Kevin and Marcus. For Marcus, it was the first time an adult had validated his experience and shown him that his current pain could become future power. For Kevin, it was the realization that his childhood trauma could be transformed into healing mission for other kids who were walking the same difficult path. "Marcus asked me if I would come back and talk to him again," Kevin said, "and then he asked if I might talk to some of his friends who were also getting bullied. That's when I realized this wasn't just about one conversation. This was about creating a systematic way to help kids who were going through what I had experienced." From that initial conversation, Kevin had developed an informal program of school visits focused specifically on supporting children who were experiencing bullying. Unlike his public appearances, these visits were private and unannounced, arranged quietly through school counselors and administrators who identified students who might benefit from Kevin's perspective. Kevin's approach was practical and personal. He would meet with small groups of bullied students, sharing his own story in age-appropriate ways and teaching them specific strategies for dealing with harassment. He showed them how to use humor as protection without becoming the class clown, how to build confidence in their differences rather than trying to hide them, and how to find support from adults and peers who could help them navigate difficult situations. "I teach them that being different is actually a superpower," Kevin explained. "But like any superpower, you have to learn how to use it. Being short forced me to develop other skills: humor, resilience, empathy, determination. Those skills made me successful in ways that being tall never could have." The sessions weren't just motivational speaking, they were practical workshops. Kevin taught kids how to respond to bullies with confidence rather than defensiveness, how to find their own unique talents and use them to build self-esteem, and how to create support networks with other students who appreciated them for who they were. One of the most important things I teach them is that bullies usually target people they're jealous of or intimidated by. Kevin said, when someone makes fun of you for being different, it's often because they wish they had the courage to be different themselves. Understanding that dynamic helps kids realize that bullying is about the bully's insecurity, not about their own worth. Over 7 years, Kevin's informal anti-bullying program had reached hundreds of students across dozens of schools. He kept detailed notes about each student he worked with, following up with them over months and years to check on their progress and provide ongoing support. I've worked with kids who were bullied for being too tall, too short, too smart, not smart enough, different races, different religions, different family structures. Kevin said, the specifics change, but the underlying experience is the same. Feeling like you don't fit in, like there's something wrong with you that everyone else can see. The success stories had been remarkable. Kevin had watched formerly withdrawn, depressed children transform into confident young people who embrace their differences as strengths. Some had developed their own comedy skills, using humor to connect with classmates rather than defend against them. Others had found different talents, art, music, academics, sports, that gave them confidence and social connection. Marcus, the first kid I worked with, is now 16 and performs stand-up comedy at school talent shows, Kevin said with obvious pride. He uses his height and his experience with bullying as material, and he gets standing ovations. He went from hiding in the library to commanding the stage. But Kevin's work extended beyond individual students to changing school cultures around bullying and difference. He worked with teachers and administrators to help them recognize the signs of bullying and respond more effectively. He provided training on how to create classroom environments where differences were celebrated rather than mocked. The goal isn't just to help individual kids survive bullying, Kevin explained. The goal is to change the whole school culture so that differences are seen as interesting rather than threatening, so that kids learn to appreciate diversity rather than attack it. Kevin's anti-bullying work had remained largely private until a school principal in Chicago had written a letter to his management company describing the transformation they had witnessed in their student body after Kevin's visit. The letter had been forwarded to entertainment journalists, and eventually a few stories had emerged about Kevin's quiet mission to help bullied children. But Kevin had been careful to keep the work low profile, not wanting it to seem like a publicity stunt or to exploit the vulnerable children he was trying to help. He turned down interview requests about the program and avoided including it in his comedy routines, treating it as separate from his entertainment career. Tonight's appearance on The Tonight Show was supposed to be standard promotional fare for Kevin's latest film, a family comedy about overcoming obstacles. Jimmy had planned to ask about the movie, maybe do some games, definitely get the audience laughing with Kevin's signature high-energy humor, but something about the film's themes of resilience and self-acceptance had made Kevin more reflective than usual about his own journey from bullied kid to successful adult. The interview had started exactly as expected. Kevin bounded onto the stage with his usual enthusiasm, immediately connecting with the audience through his animated storytelling and self-deprecating humor. Jimmy had asked about the new movie, and Kevin had launched into hilarious behind-the-scenes stories that had the audience roaring with laughter. But when Jimmy asked about Kevin's own experiences with overcoming obstacles, something shifted in Kevin's demeanor. The comedian's mask didn't exactly slip, but it became more transparent, revealing something deeper and more serious underneath. "You know, Jimmy," Kevin said, his voice taking on a more reflective tone, "people see me now, and they think being short was always just a comedy goldmine for me. But the truth is, being different as a kid, especially being different in a way that people feel free to comment on constantly, that's really hard." The audience grew slightly quieter, sensing that Kevin was moving into more serious territory than his usual comedy. Jimmy leaned forward with genuine interest. What was it like dealing with that as a kid? Kevin was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. It was brutal, man. I mean, really brutal. Kids can be incredibly creative when they want to hurt someone, and being short gave them endless material. It wasn't just occasional teasing, it was daily harassment that made me question everything about myself. The studio was now completely focused on Kevin's words, the energy shifting from anticipatory laughter to attentive listening. I remember being 12 years old and genuinely believing that I was fundamentally flawed as a human being, Kevin continued, like I thought God had made a mistake when he made me and everyone could see it. That's a heavy thing for a kid to carry. Jimmy was clearly moved by Kevin's honesty. How did you get through it? Comedy saved me, Kevin said simply, but not in the way people think. It wasn't just about making jokes to deflect the bullying. It was about learning that the things that made me different could actually be the things that made me special. Kevin paused, then made a decision that would transform the entire interview. Jimmy, can I tell you about something I've been doing for the past 7 years? Something I don't usually talk about publicly? Of course, Jimmy replied, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. Kevin took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. I visit schools and work with kids who are being bullied, kids who are going through what I went through, feeling different, feeling alone, feeling like there's something wrong with them that everyone else can see. The audience fell completely silent. Jimmy's expression changed from curious to deeply moved as he began to understand what Kevin was describing. You work with bullied kids? Jimmy asked softly. I find the kids who eat lunch alone, who get picked on for being different, who are starting to believe that being unique is a bad thing, Kevin explained, and I show them that being different is actually a superpower. You just have to learn how to use it. Jimmy felt tears forming in his eyes. Kevin, that's incredible. How long have you been doing this? 7 years. 47 kids so far, Kevin said, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his mission. Some were bullied for being short like me, others for being tall or smart, or different races, or different family situations. The specifics don't matter. What matters is helping them understand that their differences are their strengths. The audience was completely silent now, witnessing a side of Kevin Hart they had never seen before, vulnerable, serious, deeply committed to healing the same wounds he had once carried. Can you tell us about one of these kids? Jimmy asked, his voice thick with emotion. Kevin smiled for the first time since he'd started talking about his anti-bullying work. Marcus was my first. He was in 5th grade, getting bullied for being short, hiding in the library during lunch, reminded me so much of myself at that age. Brilliant kid who was starting to believe he was worthless because other kids made fun of his height. Kevin's voice grew stronger as he continued. I spent 2 hours with Marcus that first day, just talking about what it was like to be different, how to turn pain into power, how to use humor as protection without becoming a target. But most importantly, I showed him that the same thing that made him a target could eventually make him special. Jimmy was openly crying now. What happened to Marcus? He's 16 now, performs stand-up comedy at school talent shows, Kevin said, with obvious pride, uses his height and his experience with bullying as material, and gets standing ovations. He went from hiding in the library to commanding the stage. That's what happens when you help a kid understand that different doesn't mean less than. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the typical comedian applause. It was recognition, respect, acknowledgement that they were witnessing something profound. Kevin, Jimmy said, wiping his eyes, you've taken your own childhood trauma and turned it into healing for other kids. That's not just comedy, that's ministry. It's responsibility, Kevin replied. When you've experienced something painful and you've learned how to transform that pain into strength, you have an obligation to help other people who are walking that same path. Jimmy looked at Kevin with new respect. How do you approach these kids? What do you tell them? I tell them exactly what I wish someone had told me when I was 12, Kevin said. That being different is not a flaw, it's a feature. That the things that make you stand out are often the things that will make you successful. That bullies usually target people they're jealous of or intimidated by. Kevin's voice grew more passionate as he continued. I teach them practical strategies, how to use humor without becoming a class clown, how to build confidence in their differences, how to find other kids who appreciate them for who they are. But most importantly, I show them that their current pain can become their future power. Jimmy made a decision that would become one of the most emotional moments in Tonight Show history. Kevin, is there any way we could meet one of the kids you've worked with? Kevin smiled through his own tears. Actually, Marcus drove down from Philadelphia tonight. He's in the audience. The camera found Marcus in the audience, now a confident, poised 16-year-old who stood up and waved when his name was called. The visual of the boy who had once hidden in libraries, now proudly acknowledging his connection to Kevin, was immediately powerful. Marcus, would you like to come up here? Jimmy asked. Marcus made his way to the stage with the kind of confidence that comes from learning to embrace what makes you different. When he reached Kevin, the reunion was immediate and emotional, a hug between a mentor and student that represented years of growth and healing. Tell everyone what Kevin taught you, Jimmy said gently. Mr. Kevin taught me that being short wasn't my weakness, it was my secret weapon, Marcus said into the microphone with surprising poise. He showed me that the same thing that made kids make fun of me could eventually make them cheer for me. Marcus paused, looking at Kevin with obvious affection. But most importantly, he taught me that different doesn't mean less than. It just means you have to work a little harder to show people how amazing different can be. The audience was on their feet now, applauding not just for Kevin's work, but for Marcus's transformation and courage. As the segment concluded with this unexpected reunion, something unprecedented happened. The entire studio audience remained standing for over 5 minutes, not just applauding, but recognizing that they had witnessed something that transcended entertainment. Kevin's revelation about his anti-bullying work became one of the most shared Tonight Show segments in the program's history. But more importantly, it inspired a national conversation about bullying, resilience, and the power of turning personal pain into purpose. Schools across the country reached out to Kevin's team asking for visits. Anti-bullying organizations invited him to speak at conferences. Most meaningfully, hundreds of formerly bullied kids shared their own stories of transformation, crediting Kevin's example with helping them embrace their differences. But perhaps the most significant impact came from the dozens of comedians and entertainers who were inspired by Kevin's example to share their own experiences with childhood bullying and to use their platforms for healing rather than just entertainment. 6 months later, Kevin was invited back to The Tonight Show for a follow-up segment. He brought with him a collection of videos from kids he had worked with, formerly bullied children who had transformed their differences into strengths, their pain into power, their shame into pride. This is what change looks like, Kevin told the audience, showing the videos of confident, successful young people. When you help one kid understand that different is beautiful, you don't just change their life, you change how they'll treat other people who are different. Kevin continues his anti-bullying work, now with official support from his production company and formal partnerships with school districts across the country. His notebook of kids he's helped has grown to include over 200 names, each representing a young person who learned that their greatest perceived weakness could become their greatest actual strength. Sometimes the most powerful comedy comes not from making people laugh at others, but from teaching them to laugh with themselves. Kevin Hart proved that turning personal pain into purpose isn't just good comedy, it's good humanity, demonstrated by one man who understood that the differences that once made him a target could eventually make him a healer. Today, thousands of kids across the country know that being different doesn't mean being less than. It means being special in ways that normal people can't understand. That lesson didn't come from a textbook or a counselor. It came from a comedian who was brave enough to share his scars so other people could heal their own.